grandmother. I am a doula too, and I am the community ministry pastor at Jubilee Mennonite Church and the acting director of Community Roots Resource Center, which has come from our community ministry. I have a huge passion for neighboring and a huge passion for the least of these, I would say. My husband and I are front yard people, and we do use our front yard as our yard so that we can interact with our neighbors. At Jubilee Mennonite Church, I am the community ministry pastor, and for the last 11 years, we have been intentionally connecting with our neighbors, which are mostly Manitoba housing people. They are low income, a lot have mental health issues, addictions, mostly single moms, high Indigenous population. And we have muddled through this whole neighboring thing by learning that the root of it is in our hearts, and that building relationships with those who we connect with is the first part of it.
Yeah. First kind of question, why art of neighboring? What kind of caught your attention about this specific initiative?
So quite a few years ago, I went to a conference in Seattle, and that conference was called Inhabit. And I signed up to go to one of the speakers, who was Dave Runyon, who is the co-author of The Art of Neighboring. And as I sat there and I listened to him talk, I was like, of course, this is what Jesus wants us to do. Like, we could actually change the world by engaging with our neighbors. And the statistics that he talked about, the amount of Christians who didn't know their first, like the first names of their neighbors, who didn't know their neighbors, was like disturbing to me. It's like, why don't we? And what can we do to move us? And what changes need to happen in our hearts to make us to want to be neighbors to those who live right around us? So after I came back from Seattle, I was just like, I was so excited about engaging not only with our neighbors, but with other churches and telling other churches about the art of neighboring. So there were 10 churches in North Kildonan who engaged in this 3-part sermon series that you guys have. We had the same signs, so everywhere you went, you would see these signs that said the same thing. There was a Catholic church and the United Church, Lutheran, Mennonite, and Mennonite Brethren churches who participated in it. And people in the neighborhood were like, something's going on here, because all of the churches, like, and this is what the neighbors would say. They was like, you guys aren't even the same kind of like religions, and you still have the same sign. Like, what's going on? And then all of us, the 10 of us churches, then had either a block party or a neighborhood cleanup, somehow engaging with our neighbors around the church. And then we were all invited to continue the art of neighboring and learn our neighbors' names and learn more about them. And the other thing is that you just know Jesus showed us how to do this. Jesus walked among neighborhoods. Jesus sat with the common people, the people that were out there, the sick, the least of these. Jesus had a motley crew of disciples. Jesus has shown us in the Gospels how to be excellent neighbors.
You kind of talked a little bit about your neighbors and who's next door to your church.
Right.
And you started with the 3-part sermon series What has kind of come out of that, and what is your church up to now as far as neighboring?
Right. So as I had mentioned before, we have been engaging in community ministry and the art of neighboring for over 11 years. And from that, our response has been to create the Community Roots Resource Center. So this is housed in Jubilee Mennonite Church, and we intentionally open up our doors to anyone in the neighborhood to come and build relationships with us. And depending on what the neighborhood is like, so before we started all this, we had to get to know our neighbors. We had to know not only what their needs were, but what their assets were and what they could bring to the neighborhood, how they could help to build strong neighborhoods. And one of the examples is our garden, our community garden. We started out with having 30 or 25 people from Jubilee Gardening, and now we have 5 people from Jubilee Gardening and 25 people from the neighborhood gardening. And they have taken ownership. We have our fire pit that, you can come and have a fire in the evening, and we have neighbors coming and sitting around. Everything we do, we try and think of how we can not only meet the needs by an emergency pantry, but also celebrate our neighbors' gifts. And one of the ways that works lovely is our clothing fair. So the women from the neighborhood come together and they put out all the donated clothes that we have gotten, and they set it up, and we chat together, and we drink coffee and eat. And they have taken this on, and now they are more responsible for it. They're like, okay, when is the clothing fair happening? I think we should get together in the morning now. I don't think we should wait till the afternoon, because then we run out of time. So they've taken this initiative, and it has become theirs, and they are so proud of it. We've engaged them in last year when we had the Community Roots launch party. Some of the women from Community Kitchen, they helped prepare the food that we were going to be serving. They served the food, and they came in their best dress, and this was such a special occasion. They were blooming, and I know that God was smiling, because they felt like this is our church, this is our Community Roots Center.
And I know you don't only engage with neighboring as a church. I know you and your husband are very intentional in your own personal neighborhood as well.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about what that looks like.
Well, that was one of those things where you wonder if, sometimes God needs to knock you on the head. Well, one year, a tree fell on our house. And it wasn't a very happy experience. It was quite stressful, because I was in the house at the time, but a tree fell on our house, and what we observed is having that tree in our yard, all of a sudden, people would start coming and talking to us about what happened, what are you going to do about the tree, all of those questions. What was interesting to me, though, was when the tree did fall, none of our neighbors came to the house right at that moment. When there was this emergency, and it was an emergency for me, my husband wasn't home, and I was saddened that none of our neighbors came. But we noticed that once the tree fell, we started engaging with our neighbors. So what we decided was that our front yard, probably I was a little bit more decided about that, right, Walter, would be how we would neighbor. So we moved the fire pit into our front yard. We have kids' toys in our front yard. We're still in the process of fixing up our house, and my idea is to have this walkway coming from the main sidewalk so people can walk into our yard and look at the plants and play with the toys. And we put up a free library just a couple of weeks ago, and my husband was working outside, and he was like, oh my gosh, look at all these people stopping by. Now we know our neighbors a lot more, and there's lots of different stories I can tell you about how we've engaged with our neighbors and how our neighbors have engaged with us. But it's just the idea of opening your heart to being interrupted, opening your heart to slowing down, opening your heart to be in your front and not worrying about like, well, I have to put a big fence up so that I have my privacy. Because I don't think really Jesus has called us to that. I think Jesus has called us to be present right where we've been planted. So it's not always easy. It's not easy, but I believe that we're called to do that.
Mm-hmm. I warned you that it might need to be flexible, so
Yes.
I might not follow my list.
That's totally
So
fine.
you've tempted us a little bit by saying you have a couple of
Yes,
stories. So why not, can you share a couple of significant interactions with your
Sure,
neighbors?
yes. I remember when we just moved in years ago, there was a gentleman, Horst and Marianne, who were beside us, our neighbors, and I remember, just kind of being in the yard and hearing this big, burly voice like, Marianne, we want to go get the garden. And I was just like, whoa, like, this guy is kind of scary, and maybe he shouldn't be talking to his wife like that. But as time went by, my husband is wonderful at being able to make connections with people and talk with them. As time went by, we kind of realized that he was just this gentle giant. He was a big man with a big, burly voice, but a huge heart. And he grew orchids. And Marianne, they have a beautiful relationship, and they were loving and tender with each other. But he just had this big, burly voice, and all of our kids were scared of him but as we continued to engage with him and talk with him, and he loved birds, so kind of finding out what he loved and then talking with him about that. Our daughter Serena loved orchids, so then she would talk with him. We started to grow this beautiful relationship. And then he became sick. And so we decided that we were going to help Marianne. And so we would take her grocery shopping. He was at the hospital. We would drive her to the hospital. And then she really wanted to bring him home. But the only way she could bring him home was if she had a ramp. So then Walter built a ramp for them so that he could come home. And there were times when taking her grocery shopping would just kind of add one more thing to the day. But we really felt that we had a relationship with them, and we loved them. And when he passed away, we both grieved, and we still do. When you see the birds in the spring, or they would be out in the yard gardening, and you would see Marianne there only now. We still are grieving him. And that relationship has enriched our lives. And we would talk about our faith, and it enriched our lives. The other relationship that we had was more on the scary side. And so even though there is fear and you have to be safe, like you always have to make sure that you're safe, I don't think that's a reason to stop. I don't think the fear is a reason to stop. I think there's ways to get past that. So the couple across the street from us, you could tell that something was not right there because you would hear very loud voices a lot of the times, and we both tried to engage with them. They both seemed very harried and hassled, and just you knew something wasn't right. And our kids knew their kids. And one time we heard something that was too much, and so we ended up calling the police. And in all of that, he made a threat to me. So then there was a restraining order against him to come within so many, feet of our home. So that was really hard, and it was kind of like a little bit of a step back, because you're feeling scared, and you feel like when I would always be looking over my shoulder to make sure that he wasn't around. But I still felt very compelled to continue to be a good neighbor. Years later, and that's something about neighboring, you might never see what your interaction and what you're sharing your life and talking about your relationship with Jesus may do. But years later, he came back and he asked for forgiveness. And he said he was sorry. And he said he changed his life. And, you hear so many stories where you plant the seed, but you don't necessarily see where that seed goes and where it can flourish. And again, that can be discouragement, but no, we're called to plant the seed. God will take care of changing people's hearts. We are the seed planters.
What are some of the other positive changes that you've seen in your neighborhood as a result of neighboring well?
Well, there's definitely, in terms of safety, like you can look at knowing your neighbors is a good way to keep your streets safe. So, if something weird happens, I know at our neighbors, the alarm went off and we didn't think they were home. So then we were able to phone their family and say, hey, the alarm's going off, we just want to make sure everything's okay. So safety is one thing that you can actually increase the safety in your neighborhood by knowing your neighbors. The idea of life is busy, but if you have neighbors who might be willing to help you do something, that doesn't take away from that takes away from the busiest of life. So even simple things like, I remember last year, we have our neighbors across the street. These are new neighbors, and their kids call us Omi and Opa, because they hear our grandkids. So it's like, hi, Omi, hi, Opa. And we took them baby gifts, and we brought them food, and they reciprocated on last Thanksgiving, by bringing us a loaf. And for me, it was like I was thinking, I needed to bake something for something I was going to, but here they gave me this gift. So it was one less thing I had to do by my neighbors reciprocating. Simple things like, hey, I need a cup of sugar. You can go to your neighbors, and then you don't have to run to the store. There's so many ways that our neighborhood, and just the whole idea that there are people there who you can go to if you need to. And the other way, again, a story about the neighbors across the street. Their little boy had got dropped off. He's like 9 years old. He got dropped off at home, and his parents weren't home. He came straight over to our house and said, Omi, can I wait here? My parents aren't home yet. And they had never told him to do that. But he felt safe enough to come to our house and wait for his parents. So again, it just makes your neighborhood safer. It makes it stronger. I think on a big scale, if we were all excellent neighbors, it would also just, our cities and our towns would be a place where everybody's helping each other. Shoveling snow. When there's a storm, you always see all your neighbors out. So maybe shovel the other person's, and then they'll reciprocate. So those are the kind of changes. I just, there's joy too. You see the kids that walking down the street, and now we have the free library, and the kids all take books and bring books back. And it's the kids' books that go more than our adults' books that I noticed, because we noticed and observed that there's lots of people walking their kids by. So observing what your neighborhood is like, being intentional about watching what goes on in your neighborhood. Are there lots of dogs walking by? Leave a bowl full of water for the dogs to have a drink.
Our time is passing too quickly. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions.
Perfect.
And so then I can just let you talk
Perfect.
a little bit longer.
Okay.
First of all, tell us a little bit about Turquoise Table and living in
Okay.
your front yard.
Yep.
And then the second thing is, I want to ask you, we don't love our neighbors to convert them. We love our neighbors because we are converted. Can you discuss the tension in that statement?
That could be a whole sermon.
Yes. But I don't want to miss that one.
No, okay, perfect. All right. So the turquoise table, I kind of came upon that a few years ago, and I was intrigued, like, what is this thing about the turquoise table? So of course everybody like Googles things now. So I Googled turquoise table, and there's a woman who has started an initiative called the Turquoise Table. And what she was thinking was, she was praying and she was like, God, I really feel there's some calling you have for me. So one day she looked at this picnic table, painted it turquoise, and put it in her front yard. And she intentionally sat there every day with her laptop and just waited. And every day she'd be like, okay, God, I really think I need to get to know my neighbors. I'm here, I'm waiting, I'm open. And slowly by slowly, there were people who would come and sit at the turquoise table with her and chat. And now, the Turquoise Table Initiative has taken over all across North America. And it's a perfect way to start your neighboring. So I'm hoping that soon, one day, I'll come to Steinbach and I'll see turquoise picnic tables in everybody's yard. We have a turquoise kind of bistro table and two turquoise chairs, and I painted my free library turquoise. And I brought you a turquoise table today to be a reminder that all it takes is a picnic table, some turquoise paint, put it in your front yard, and hang out there. If you want, she has a book out, The Turquoise Table, Christine Schul, and if you Google Turquoise Table, you'll see all sorts of ways ways that you can interact. She has an Easter egg day where they paint Easter eggs outside. Valentine's, use those holidays as great ways to neighbor too. So that's about the turquoise table, and I'll move on to the next question. If anybody wants to know about it, I'll be here after. Yes, that is a really good question. We don't love our neighbors to convert them. We love our neighbors because we are converted. So in working at Jubilee with a lot of our neighbors, one of the common thing I heard is, yeah, you churches, you just want us to be your project. You just want to tick it off as we're another person who comes to Jesus. So I was pondering and praying about that and thinking, as we go out and neighbor, we want to know, it's about our heart. So our hearts have to be the one that sets forth into relationships. And our hearts have to really, really want to be in relationship. We have to want to be neighbors. We have to want to connect with the least of these. If our hearts are not in that place, then continue to pray that your hearts get in that place. Because the worst thing you'd want is someone to think they're your project. And I think that comes historically from, we are so excited. We love Jesus so much that we want everybody to love Jesus. We want everybody to know Jesus. And what a better way than first loving them and sharing what our life is like, sharing that we have been conquered. We are the ones that we can share our stories. We can share how Jesus has made an impact in our lives. And through those stories, people will say, hey, I want to have that too. But if we come in with the mentality that, you know what, we need to convert them, we need to change them, people are going to know. People are going to say, you know what? I want to be loved. I want to feel like I belong. I just don't want someone to be converting me. And in the book, Staying is the New Going, and I will, it says it really, really good. This is one of the books that I would recommend you reading. Staying is the New Going. So, certainly the gospel reveals that Jesus is the conqueror and converter, not us. He has conquered our sin, and he alone has the power to save. We, on the other hand, are more than conquerors in Jesus. We are stewards of his gift, caretakers of his fields. As we leave conquering and converting to Jesus, we find ourselves knee-deep in soil he has allowed us to cultivate. This is what God has wired us to be, fully present, blessings to those around us, and stewarding the great gifts of God. So go in with your hearts. Go in because you really, really want to love this person.
Thank you so much for joining me
welcome.
today. Thank you for helping me wrap up the series, The Art of Neighboring. Yeah, thank you. I'll invite all of you. There is a table at the back. There's a few more Art of Neighboring books. I'll ask Anna Marie to join me back there after the service as well if you have any more questions. She's brought some books along as well. Please don't take her books, but if they look interesting to you, just snap a picture with your phone, engage with her if you have any more questions. And also at the back table there, if you're interested in care groups, this is going to be my final sign-up Sunday of the fall. Of course, you can always email me if you'd like to join a care group, but you can sign up in the foyer today. I'll invite the worship team up.